Welcome, everybody. We are calling to order this work session. We are grateful for those who have taken time from their schedule to join us, members of the public and department heads. Our agenda tonight is to review and discuss the fiscal year 18 budgets, and we will, Mayor, would you like to kick this off?
Sure. Thank you, council members. The main two things to look at this budget is in year-to-year budgets was what's different. You know, what's different this year versus what's different last year. One thing you're going to see is we've added for public safety. We've added 10 police officers. The other thing that we've done is we've put in 2 times the number for paving. And that is because that's one of the demands that we are hearing out on the streets is that we need to do more paving. Last year we were about $5.6 to $6 million. This year we're $12 million. Peggy Sargent is our finance director and has done a great job on the budget. John Hamilton has been working very closely with her and has done the general budget and the outlying budgets in consultation with Ms. Sargent, who really put all this together. And then Shane Davis has been in charge of putting the numbers together for the 10-year capital plan. And both sides of the 10-year capital plans and the urban development side. The big thing to know is that each of our between John and Shane, they put the input together, they put the numbers together, they get them to Peggy. Peggy makes sure that they work, and work is a very important word in government. We have been AAA rated since 2009, and because of this kind of work and the kind of work that we put into this budget, that's the reason that we have been AAA rated. So we take that very seriously, and we take that very seriously for the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Sargent, and she's got some slides to go through, and after her slides, we'll turn it over to John Hamilton and then to Shane Davis. And council members, however y'all want to do this, if you want to go through the full presentation, then have questions, or if you want to just go into questions as we go through, it's up to you.
Probably would be best to have questions as presentations are made, or what would y'all?
I think that's best. But
Yeah.
Or can we just probably do questions at the end of each, Peggy, and then John, and then does that make sense? Instead of having everybody come back up, just if you have questions for Peggy at the end of her presentation?
that's fine.
Okay, well then let's do that. We'll let each person present, and then questions after each person presents.
If I could, I'd like to kind of get mine in before quarter till. I'm going to be leaving, and I'll come back or swing back and see if it's still going on.
And we understand you have a town hall meeting, Mr. Klein. Mr.
Mayor
Russell?
Battle, are all your department heads going to be here? They're not all here now.
No. We did not ask all department heads to be here. We asked some of the major department heads to be here with some of the major departments.
Okay, I see Chief McMurray. Is the fire chief coming?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And if department heads are not here, Mayor Battle, you and Mr. Hamilton will handle, and Mr. Davis. Very good. All right, Ms. Sargent, the floor is yours.
So for 2018, we've managed long-term operating budgets, positioning the city to continue with its AAA rating with a balanced budget. This includes funding the step increases for the employees that are eligible, as well as a 1% cost of living increase. And we will also continue to maintain the contingency reserve at the 11.5% required. We are currently projecting health insurance to remain unchanged for the members of the PPO plan and a minimal increase for the active employees in the PCN. However, we have not finished negotiating those contracts, so we don't have that finalized. As the mayor mentioned, we are increasing the police department by 10 sworn officers and then 2 additional non-sworn. We're also increasing in municipal court based on the recent decision to add 2 new full-time judges. We're increasing landscape management by 6 people for park maintenance, and then WPC by 6. As was noted at Thursday night's council meeting, the general fund revenues are projected to be at $197.6 million, and the general fund expenses are also at $197.6 million. 74% of that is in personnel expenses. Your $97.6 million of revenue is broken down in this manner. Sales and use tax is $105 million of that. Your next largest is property tax at just under 17.2. License and permits is 25.2. Other taxes, including your pilot programs, is 28. Charges such as sanitation is another 12.7. And then other fees that are collected is another approximately 9 million. And again, your expenses, personnel is your largest piece. You have appropriations of another 11 million too. Transfers to other funds is 5.8. Just in a different form for those of you that see numbers better than charts. At the end of the year, the general fund will be balanced with with hopefully $43,000 left, compared to last year where we were at about 40,000. In addition to the general fund, your other operating funds that function in the city are public transit. This shows you that you can see that their 2018 budget is again the largest portion is personnel at 3.2 million. This is very similar to their 2017 budget, which was 3.3. Community development is another one of the large operating funds within the city. Personnel, again, is your largest section. I may need to look at something on this one, I'm sorry.
It sure doesn't look right from.
No, it doesn't, I'm sorry. I need to verify that one.
Somebody's getting a big raise.
Yeah, that's not, there's something there that needs to be double checked, yeah. They have gone up slightly, but not that much. So I'll double check what number may have gotten pulled incorrectly on that chart. I'm sorry about that. Then WPC. Theirs is a little bit different because they function with 4 funds which have been combined here, and they do have a large operating capital component where they build out the infrastructure. So they have a large capital construction project planned for 2018, which is causing that increase that you see in 2018. But you can see personnel is the other large component of their fund. EMA is, although not one of our larger funds, it is a major component for the city. They are a separate entity that we receive funds from the city of Madison and Madison County. Personnel is their largest piece. You can see over the last few years that they have been going down a little bit in their expenditures across the board. As insurance is always an area of concern in the city, this is showing you that we are staying fairly consistent this year versus last year on the insurance costs, both for what the employees contribute, the retirees contribute, and the city contributes. Appropriations have decreased slightly from 17 to 18. Part of this is restructuring, moving some of the appropriations into the liquor and lodging fund where they belong, well, where they fit more correctly with the structure.
Questions for Ms. Sargent?
Madam President.
Mr. Russell?
Ms. Sargent, I didn't see how much, like a percentage increase you're predicting. How aggressive are we on this budget, like revenues, and are you positive we're going to hit those numbers?
We used approximately a 2% increase on the revenues. This year we are tracking, we used 2% last year also, and we are tracking very flat to the budget. So assuming that we have a similar year in 18 that we had to 17, we should be very safe with these numbers.
Okay, so we're basically predicting 2% growth. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Okay.
And the property taxes actually are using the county's numbers that they provided for 18.
Okay, and you had a slide with EMA had some operating capital for the first time in several years. Do you know what that is or why we're having to do that?
It's predominantly 2 vehicles. They need to replace some fleet.
Okay. Then I'll have other questions for department heads. But
Mr. Kling?
The public transit budget that you brought up. The public transit budget that you brought up, does it make any overtures toward expanding the Saturday bus service? I know that we've had discussions in the past. I think Mr. Brown was going to take a look at it. Is that in the budget?
Mr. Kling, it's not. Adding Saturday service is about a $600,000 proposition. We could probably get about $100,000 of that reimbursed by federal funds. So the city contribution would be about $500,000. Right now, that does not fit in the budget. I mean, we would have to make significant trade-offs to other things in order to be able to put that into the budget. So the budget you're looking at is continuing the same level of service that we've had this year and prior.
Okay. The proposed, we've seen emails and stuff out there, the retiree COLA, as I understand it, that is not in the budget. Is that correct?
So
No, sir. Tyree COLA is not in the budget, but we have held the
Health
insurance
insurance.
rates level on retirees. If we go by our normal formula, which is 40-60, 40-60% split in the insurance rates, we would be upping the retiree insurance rates significantly. The amount of money that the increase for retirees would have been washes with the amount that it would be the increase of the insurance. So we chose to take care of the employees who still were on our insurance, the retiree insurance, and do that instead of upping the insurance. It's a wash in the amount, but we felt like it was a fair way to handle the retirees.
Okay. The road resurfacing, I'm assuming that's going to be under capital. Is that, okay, we'll come back to that later, which is certainly good. Are there any new agencies in the special appropriation budget?
No.
Okay. Okay.
And there may be one that goes to the schools, which we put in there, the Spark Literacy Program, for a one-time amount of $12,000. It is a literacy program to help kids who are in low-income housing to get to grade level performance in the first and second grade. We have it was one of those that the schools had funded partially, and they still had $12,000 that were necessary to fund with them. And we did a one-time agreement in there, but it is, you'll find it down in the school funding.
no, let me clarify. You will not see it listed separately in the budget because we actually just increased the school's appropriation by $12,000 in order to cover that. The schools are already assisting with the funding of that program. It's a Boys and Girls Club program that's operated out of their West Huntsville Center. And so we've increased the school appropriation by that amount in order to make our contribution up.
And you'll point that out to us when we get to the special agency appropriations budget?
That's
Is
what I'm
that where
saying,
it
is it's not,
It'll be in
it's
schools.
not
Oh,
listed there as a
it's just in
separate.
the regular schools budget? Okay.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Mr. Keith, did you, oh,
Peggy, now, and these aren't all of them. You know, I'm gonna email the majority of them. But let's go back to the COLA. Why did we decide 1% and not 2%?
That was an administrative decision. It cost us $1.2 million. Is that about right? About $1.2 million for a 1% increase. We had about $3 million extra. I mean, more this year than we had last year that we were working with across the board budgeting, and felt like that the 1% fit in along with the added personnel and the added money for road repaving. That 1% was a fair amount. If you look back in the history of last, I guess, 9 years, we're up about 8.5%. Is that the number? We're up about 8.5%, so I think that we've been very, very fair in making sure that we stay within the labor market, but don't go beyond the labor market, but stay very much within. Average worker in Madison County makes $52,000 a year. Average worker in City Hall makes about $50,000 a year. Then when you add the longevity pay and some of the others in, we're very much into the same place that the average worker is.
Which I guess it gets to my bigger point, Mayor, with talked to John about this. Does this, and I guess Myron, or you can answer it, if we do get this COLA 1% increase, does this affect the starting pay for, let's say, a police officer or, garbage
Yes.
truck worker?
The way, anytime council approves a COLA, it just takes our pay chart and adds that percent across every single grade and step. So in this case, the entire pay chart will get a 1% increase.
How do we increase the market, competitive market percentage or starting pay for specific departments? If I wanted to make a position more competitive in the market per hourly, how do I see that in the budget? Does that proposal have to come from the, director or administration, or can I?
So within our current system, if there was a particular job class that council wanted to increase the pay, then you would have to go in and do a targeted increase of the grade for those particular positions. That's something that there's been a couple of times when council has contemplated that for various job classes. It's something that you need to be extremely cautious with, because the grade structure for all of our employees, they are tied to each other. So, if you move one particular job class, then you're having a ripple effect potentially across a lot of them, and you potentially start messing up supervisory chains, things like that. So it's a study, and if there was something like that you wanted to consider, then I would say the right approach would be ask the administration to go in and do analysis of how do we compare to other municipalities and if there's similar jobs out in the civilian workforce, but also take a look at how would that impact the rest of the workforce. And we can do that for you if you want us to look at that, but that's not a quick and easy decision. That's something you would certainly want to really study and be cautious with doing that.
Absolutely.
Like I said, we've done that before.
Yeah, and I guess, let me just completely open. I'm talking in public safety, as we've had before I was here, this conversation between fire department and police, and understanding as many people who have reached out to me on one side versus the other side, what that looks like. I just wanted to know if the decision was made, let's say in February, the departments would be able to make that change in their pay structure.
Well, if council made the decision to make that change, part of your decision would be when it took effect.
Gotcha.
And so we would apply it whenever you decided and directed us to do so.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sargent, what would be the department that asked for the most increase? If, I know they all come to you as if you are the pot of gold, but what department would we say has the largest growth, and then the department that probably asked for the largest growth but maybe didn't get it?
This year, I would have to say, mainly because we're adding the heads into the police department, that would be one of the largest growths, mainly because we're getting them staffed up.
Was there a department, that asked, because I know personnel is the largest cost. Is there a department that asked for a number of resources, but we were only maybe able to meet 40 or 50 or 60% of it?
That would be, I'd have to go back through my notes, because they'll send in their requests, and then we evaluate each request versus what the request is related to and what they've been spending historically, and then citywide, how it affects everything else.
Okay.
So we'd have to look at them.
And I know it's probably, for a number of them, some have more fleets than others and so forth. And I guess that gets to my second point about that. Some of these departments have opportunity for revenue. Does every department or maybe the administration decide revenue increase? Because I imagine there are some fee rates and fee structures that we really don't dive into, as we talked about earlier, that potentially, even if it's a minimal bump, we had a decision here with the liquor and lodging tax that was presented very well, constructively. We all agreed, and that increase was shouldered, majority or will be for people who come into town. Are there other departments that if we sat down with them, they could make the same argument for a fee increase, or some sense, maybe inspection, maybe public transit?
Yeah. I think at this point, what we did was we took what we had, the knowns that we had, not the variables that we had. The knowns are what we already have in place for for a revenue stream, and we worked our revenue streams and worked our modeling to show what the growth was going to be in each of those revenue streams. As Ms. Sargent said, 2% on the sales tax. We already had numbers of what the property tax was going to be. Permits, we looked at, and we had what, about 2%, maybe something like that increase. The rest of it falls off very quickly in amounts that come in. But we don't go through and look at each individual revenue account to say, hey, should we up it? Should we lower it? Because at this point, we're taking what is known and what we have and using it to put together a budgetary model. That is done piecemeal, piece by piece as we go through, and not at budget time. The expense side is somewhat the same. We take what the known quantity is and what the known is, and then we add the emphasis where we have to, or where we feel like it's most important. Part of our emphasis was paving. Part of our emphasis was additional public safety officers. Part of our emphasis was keeping our employee rates in in line with what the community is. And once you add those, then you take the known static amount and make sure that you can true it up, revenue versus expenditure. So you put both of those together.
Yes, sir. And again, I understand the formula, how difficult it could be, and it gets to my last one. As we've talked a number of times, and I'll email to my colleagues about appropriations. I know it's not a large amount of the budget, probably, but the most that gets the most attention. When is the last time and I know you haven't been here long, has there been anybody added to the appropriations list since you've been here?
It has been pretty much a static appropriation list the whole time. And quite frankly, as you add one, you
I understand.
take off one, and it always gets to be. I think when time comes to actually pass a budget, our appropriations stay pretty static unless directed by council to move. I guess the last one got added was the prison release program. What was that, 2 years ago? 15,000. That may have been the last one got added.
Yeah, and sometimes, sometimes there's opportunities for, there's an opportunity like the Spark program that needs a 1-year investment to be successful. And so there's been, my 4 years here, there's been one or two like that where we've done a one-time, 1-year appropriation to help somebody out. But in terms of adding somebody that's in there every year, on into the future, there haven't been. In fact, there's probably been a couple that have been removed because something changed in their program.
Would you say that it would be, as I send this email out to my colleagues, to consider, in your professional opinion, the perspective is always subjective in appropriations? You really can't argue how much money goes specific to every kid that we give the Boys and Girls Club. If you were to make a change in appropriations, would you argue to increase it, or would you argue to take from other ones to create a new earmark level? So maybe if I said I want to take 4% from 10 of them to make a new line, would that be, in your opinion, the best way to balance the appropriations part?
I would have to do an analysis. We actually, in 2017, we required everybody for the first time since I've been here, and for the first time in a while, to submit their financial statements along with the receipt of their appropriations. And so honestly, in order to make a change to the appropriations, my recommendation would be to look at that data and review what they're doing and the financials that they're providing. For the most part, some of the smaller ones are struggling with that requirement a little bit, so we're going to tweak it in 2018. But they're sending in a financial statement that shows us all the revenues that they receive and then all the expenditures that they make. And so we can see how they're using the city's money as well as everybody else's that they receive. So before I would be willing to make any kind of a recommendation like that, I'd want to go back and see the use of the money.
Okay, thank you so much. And John, you would be able to talk about CDBG funding.
There's only one piece of it that we're making a city contribution. It actually, it's not CDBG, it's the home fund, is out of the capital plan. In terms of how those dollars are allocated, really need community development to address those.
Okay, Thank you so much.
Madam? Yeah.
Mr. Culver hasn't had a chance yet.
I'll defer to Councilman Kling. He has to leave.
All right, very good. Thank you. Mr. Kling.
Just kind of piggybacking on Councilman Culver, we don't really get a chance to talk to each other outside of meetings, so it's
Yeah.
all that. I been kind of looking at budget and different options and everything. If there's a way, I'd like to either now or when we get to that point, looking at the budget carryover for the current fiscal year that's not earmarked for specific projects that are funded over multi-years. The retiree COLA would be about $727,000. The Saturday bus service would be about $600,000. So that'd be $1.3 million. And if there were enough money, if you wanted to, Councilman, I'd be glad to work with you on if you wanted to maybe look at plussing up the COLA for the employees, 0.5% or full percent, or if you got an agency that you think is deserving that we could put in. Again, this is very unpolished, but again, we don't really get to talk away from public meetings, but, I'm open to
Yeah. and
ideas that you want, and, that budget carryover may be something to look at, for good projects.
I agree, and I want to say, one, thank you, but I'm going to send out, really my perspective through an email so it's tangible, but I just think it's,
We're not going to get into,
no, I'm just saying,
Okay.
I guess I'll say it out loud now. We cannot argue for efficiency in one, and growth and understanding, and not in others, and it is a little uncomfortable and unnerving, but there are things that have changed in the last time that we've added appropriations. There are organizations that have done more with less that could use that level of either support or a pilot of an option to be tried, I guess, by the city. So, I will definitely be making those recommendations.
Mr. Culver.
Thank you. And just for the record, the last time, Mayor, I think that we entertained new nonprofits was 2008 or 2009 when we opened it up to the general public. And Mr. Keith, that process was very arduous and taxing. I believe it went on for a couple of days, looking at, and everybody had good proposals, but it was just one of those things where we wish we could satisfy everybody, but we couldn't. But I'm certainly open, as Councilman Kling has stated too, to whatever projects that you may have that perhaps we can entertain. And speaking of appropriations, I'm not trying to bring a new agency, but the Arts Council, and I've been in communications with them on a regular basis, and I know that the Cultural Arts Grant is desiring an increase. Mayor, I think they may have had something worked out, but I don't recall seeing it in the budget. It was from 100,000 to about 150,000. And I'm wondering if we can manage to give them that, and a couple other things on that same line. Just hold your thought for just a second, please. The general operating budget, an additional 50,000 for that, because they've added new employees and the health care costs and the utilities and rent at the VB Civic Center. And this one, Madam President, kind of relates to one of your pet peeves, which is very appropriate, which I'd say is all of our pet peeves, and that is the late Sandra Moon facility. The cost to operate that theater. I understand that the Arts Council will probably be tasked with maybe doing some of those services, so we may need to plus them up a little bit in that area. But Mayor, that's basically it, increasing the cultural arts grants from 100,000 to 150,000, then an additional 50,000 to cover some of the staffing and healthcare and utilities and rents at the VBCC, and also to plus up the Arts Council for providing the services to the Sandra Moon facility. Thank you, Madam President.
Mr. Russell, I believe you had questions for the department
Absolutely.
heads.
May I get Chief McMurray to the microphone, please?
I was gonna give you
Is
one,
this the same?
that number there, if it's So out of what line should be 1765?
Instead of 3765. That would make sense.
Chief McMurray, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
I know you're looking forward to this. I can tell. Are you getting enough money to keep the public safe?
Yes, sir. We've been working, well, Peggy and I and John, Mr. Hamilton also, in fitting in where we're going, not just for this next year, but we've just entered a whole new phase of technology with the body-worn camera and all the servers, and now we realize we need to be in a paperless system. So we now have the officers equipped with the computers they need, and we're staffing up. We're actually vetting 3 companies right now for a records management system. Well, as you know, those records management systems, our current system is over 18 years old. It's no longer in play. It's not even being serviced. So we have to replace it. So we're looking forward to purchasing a new records management system and becoming paperless to keep our officers in the field. The very fact that they have to come back to turn in a case report or an accident report is not acceptable in today's police work. So if we can get this thing purchased by the first of the year, it's a 12-month build out. We put that in the budget on a pathway already on how to purchase that program. It is a $1 million investment in the future of how our officers perform, but it will keep the officers in the field. So that type of workflow is just what we need to get more out of our officers and to keep them in those distant zones that they're working out there as large as this city is. I think you're going to see benefits on that in 2018.
Thank you. That's good to know. What are you going to do with the 10 additional officers?
Absolutely. By all standards, the ICP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, if you go by square miles or if you go by our 2001 calls for service, you would think that we would have another 100 officers already on staff. But that's the unique thing about Huntsville. Our crime rate is 1/3 of the national average, and yet our clearance rate on those crimes is 3 times higher than the national average. It's a very unique community. So we're spread out. Our officers ride solo. They don't ride dual. So we're able to cover more square miles. And by keeping these officers in the field, which we hope to do next year with the new RMS program, you're going to see that we're able to do more with less than any other city in this country. We have a very low crime rate. We're very fortunate to have a community like this. And so we're able to manage and streamline. And these 10 officers, they're going to do 2 things. They're going to put us back up to where we need to be and pave the way for probably a central city precinct in the next coming years, which is what we're looking at doing. Those 2 civilians you saw are civilian dispatchers that we need to staff up and get ready. Because when we pull the trigger, we need some supervisors and we need some dispatchers, and we're ready to go. We're answering the calls now, but just not as efficiently as we can with that density of population that we're growing in downtown. Will require a 4th precinct in the future.
Should we speed up the process of getting a 4th precinct?
We're well on our way, sir. These 10 officers are integral part of where we're going. Yes, sir.
Okay. Tell me about your fleet. How are you doing with fleet?
Much better than when I started.
Yeah, that's an easy answer though. I want to. You had to be doing better, but are your officers happy? Do they have the modern cars? Tell me.
That recession is. We're still paying for that recession of 2008, but we're doing it in a way that doesn't wipe out the entire city. We're doing it thoughtfully. In fact, we have another 40 cars on. We have 10 coming in now. We have another 40 cars on the line getting ready to pull the trigger on this October budget. So it takes about 40 to 50 cars a year when you're running a 500-car fleet. If I'm not getting 40, 50 cars, I go behind because either my officers are crashing them or some citizen is crashing into my officers. So it's a 24/7 process. We keep about 60, 70 cars rolling at any time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it does require an investment. The fleet that putting out is state of the art. It's about $50,000 a car, fully equipped with computers, and they are excellent. We haven't crashed a single one in 2 years.
Great.
We haven't put one out of service in 2 years, let me say.
How are you handling overtime costs?
We're doing good. We're staying within our limits, and we always put back some for Operation Safe Shop, which is between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Our officers will double their activity on the street in our shopping centers, and every year we drop we keep our safe shop airing. We double the patrol in every single one of our shopping areas, and we have very low incidents of robbery. Violent crime is none. You'll see a police car in all these major shopping centers again this year because we've been able to keep under budget with our overtime.
Okay, and if the council were able to find you an extra $1 million, what would be your priority to spend it?
That's my favorite question.
I know you love this question.
Thank you
I want
for
an
that
honest
one.
answer.
Absolutely, where we're going. I might be able to buy a records management system up front. I may have to finance some of this, but we're going to make it happen. And I may buy a few more extra cars. So as you see, the cost doesn't go very far, even with the $1 million. So I would easily spend it on the direction we're going. And the records management system, it takes 12 months to build it. So even if I had more money, I still have to build it. And luckily, we've paved the way with the body-worn camera program. We bought the servers, the storage. We're ready to go for that new records management system. Is going to plug right in to the infrastructure that ITS has already set up for us. It's a good fit.
Okay, and so with the additional 10 officers, is that the amount of officers you asked for from the administration, or were you having to get cut any?
It's a careful tweak because to put each officer on the street, you have to equip them.
Okay.
Each officer costs about $10,000 worth of equipment to put on the street, and then you got to buy them a $50,000 car. So you're talking about $100,000 per officer investment. I did ask him for 10, and Mr. Hamilton found a way to get me 10 this year, and we're both going the same direction with them. We have to build up our staffing just a little bit, and we have to put more officers on the street to answer these calls.
Thank you.
Mr. Keith, do you have questions for Chief McMurray?
Hey, Chief. I guess right now you sort of look like the favorite kid, and I sort of support it. I think that it's great that we're getting you more officers. I spent a lot of time in your department, and I guess you argued for at one point that we buy the tasers.
Yes, sir.
It was a great investment. You argued for the side gun as well.
Yes, sir.
That was a great investment. You argued for the laptops.
Yes, sir.
Great investment. A lot of this stuff that we're spending money on seems very reactionary. And I know I spent a lot of time asking, what are we doing in a proactive manner? And I don't know. I know the end of this month, we're taking a trip to go see about the CCTV. Are we accounting for an increase, or not even an increase? Just, are we accounting for more community outreach, as well as inside of your budget, are you accounting for this CCTV that we will potentially go see at the end of this month?
I don't know the exact cost on that yet, Councilman. So it's a little hard for me to put my finger on the amount of money we're going to need. I think that program, I'm interested in going because I want to know how they built it.
Right.
Initially, we already have cameras all over Huntsville. We have over 100 cameras in each high school.
Yes,
so
sir.
we have cameras everywhere from water pollution control to our recreation centers. So our key will just be infrastructure-wise. How do we tap into what we have first? And I don't think that's real expensive. We just need the collector. And then how do we set up the downtown area to make it the safe area? Other cities have had to go in and move crime out of their inner city. I think what we're doing is we have a safe inner city. We want to stabilize it, keep it safe for the future. So what we're doing is very proactive. It's in that we're looking to put some additional cameras downtown. It's not that expensive. We have them in our parking structures in our downtown areas, our Veterans Memorial, our Big Spring Park. We just need a way to collect them and somebody to manage them and monitor them. So I think we're headed in the right way, and that's not all that expensive. We just need to know how they did it so that we can model our program after what was done, like in Mobile.
Yes, sir. And maybe John can sort of point to this. The proposal I was speaking of earlier in the year actually puts these in certain neighborhoods, potentially on certain streets. So we're having a number of issues, such as my neighborhood that I'm in now. And I don't want it, I guess, in a year to be down the road to hear, well, we don't have money for it. And I was hoping that at some point, potentially before we pass the budget, that you guys can account for some percentage. I don't know what that number is, maybe a guess number, so that isn't told to me if we do go down to Mobile and say that we like it. So I don't know if that takes research or if that's going to just be after we leave Mobile to say that we have money in the budget. Now, if we get to the point where we can't afford it or it supersedes the budget or you don't feel that it works, that's one thing. But I'm asking you, as we know the numbers for every taser, every side gun, every laptop, to know the number potentially that will be used for the CCTVing And I think that's only, in my opinion, as proactive as we can get if we're actually going to implement it. Respectfully.
Is that likely to be something that we would be ready to put in this year's budget, or would you have to go through some research and then it would be something that would go in next year's budget?
So what we've got, if you look in the 1990 capital plan, you'll see a line, I think it's labeled law enforcement initiatives. Obviously somewhat of a generic label, but that's on purpose because we knew that there are emerging technologies that, in the middle of September I can't necessarily name, but maybe 90 days in I can. And so there is some money there to take on some of those things. Some of the technologies that the chief has already identified, we would also look to potentially spend there. So what I can't tell you is how much, is that enough money? I really don't know.
Yes, sir.
I put in there what we could afford. If we see some emerging technologies that we collectively determine will make a real difference for our city, then we'll need to dive into the budget, maybe make amendments to it. So what you've got in front of you now is a budget that we believe gets us at least part of the way down the road. But we absolutely have got to understand exactly what those technologies will cost, what's the right way to pull them together. And so if we need to move something in the budget, that's something that we'll just need to study and bring back to you in mid-year.
Right, and I guess I'm saying let's not go to Mobile if we're not expecting to try and take a step forward to do it.
We absolutely
Okay.
intend to. Yeah.
Thank you. And the final part is, maybe you can speak to it, John, or Chief, the police facility,
Which one?
the safety facility that will be, is there in
The training facility?
Yes, sir.
It's in the budget.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll hit that when we get to the capital plan.
Thank you so much, Chief.
Mr. Kling, do you have questions?
Well, I'd piggyback with what Councilman Keith was talking about. I know you're going to have a lot of deserving streets to take a look at. I think Hall, Derrick, Thomas, Patton Road might be areas that would be worth taking a look at. I've got to leave, and I guess I just want to throw out a couple things, just duck and cover, so to speak. In the budget, and I know this is more of capital, I'd like to see, Chief, Fire Chief, if there's a way you could do something with Fire Station number 3. I think that might need to be spruced up a little bit. And then piggybacking that with Shane, I think Airport Road needs to be looked at as far as potential widening, just with the traffic flow and everything. But I just want to throw those out. I'm not trying to put anybody in the hot seat right now, but those are just a couple things that I'd had that I just want to throw out, for hopefully could be looked at in the capital portion. And Mayor, let me commend you on the road resurfacing. I think that's a great plan that you, John, I think Mark Russell had something to do with it. I think that'll be great for this community as a whole.
Anything else, Mr. Kling?
No, I'm
You
gonna do
need
my
to Head out to
contribution.
your town hall meeting.
Okay.
We will miss you. Thank you for being here. Mr. Culver, do you have any questions for the chief?
Actually, I'm going to defer to the mayor.
Okay, Chief, I do have a couple of questions for you. So we have increased the budget. Last year, I think it was by 8 officers, is that right? And this year, 10 sworn officers?
7 last year.
7 last year, 10 this year. Is it our intent to increase every year moving toward a specific goal?
Yes, ma'am.
What's the goal?
Well, the calls, it's dictated by calls for service and square mileage and response time to call. Those are my critical things that I monitor. And we're going to do much better job on that even this year as we build up our records management system, because part of that is a state-of-the-art CompStat unit that actually looks at that and gives you a dashboard picture when you come to work. Our captains will know how long it takes all their officers to get to every call in their zone. And so every zone will be looked at individually and help us staff those zones. That's something we're not doing right now. It's just not wise for us to look at that in the past. We need to look at it as a dashboard thing. When the captains and the deputy chiefs come to work, they need to know how long it's taken the officers to get to calls. They need to know how many calls their zones are getting so we can adjust as needed instead of quarterly or yearly, which is currently the best we can do right now. So you're going to see all of that in this new records management system. You're going to see a much more efficient police department. And so we're all excited about getting on board with that. As far as how many officers for the future, like I said, I don't really go by the International Association of Chiefs Police model, because that would cost you right now 100 to 120 officers just using their figures, which is, we're not the typical city in this country. And I see that as I go to these as I go around the country, just as chief, as I go to these conventions, and I'm going to Philadelphia next month again for a week of the International Association, where our crime rate doesn't call for it. Our calls for service does not yet call for it. So we're getting there, but violent crime is down this year. It's down nationally, believe it or not. You would know that if you're watching Nixle every few minutes. You'd think we're bad. But it's down nationally. It's down in this city as well. So it's been a good year. And as you saw, even our protests are done differently in this city. So we have a very, very unique city. We're growing as we should, wisely, incrementally, and we're doing it within budget limits. So I like what you're doing.
But again, you indicated that we were working toward a goal. I'm just wondering what that goal is.
Well, the goal is, the short-term goal is to staff up and get ready for the volume that we're getting in downtown Huntsville. We're going to have to address that. So the 4th precinct, which I think you'll see within the next 2 years. And that's going to require about 12 staff members total to staff it up. So that takes 12 officers off the street to provide the sergeants, the lieutenants, and the captain needed to staff up one more precinct.
And then one more question for you. Mr. Russell, I believe, asked about overtime. When we were doing our interviews with the municipal judge candidates, police overtime was mentioned a couple of different times. With the addition of an extra judge and an effort to move toward greater efficiency, are you anticipating that overtime costs for your police officers related to court could go down? Would
Yes,
that,
ma'am,
that
absolutely.
which will help you?
If an officer can go to court on his duty time, then that's just money in the bank right there, because our second and third shift officers they get paid time and a half to come in and answer and put those people away, or answer to the even tickets. They have to come in and get paid time and a half to answer for every activity they do. So absolutely, it's going to draw down on our
And I'm
overtime.
assuming you're monitoring court-related overtime, and are we going to look and see if it does decrease as
yes,
we
ma'am.
increase efficiency in the court? Good.
Madam
Mr.
President, if I could just
Oh.
touch on that.
Yes.
We started probably about 3.5 years ago talking about what we're seeing in terms of just the laws of physics impacting the way HPD does its work. This is particularly true in Councilman Culver's district, where the same precinct that has its building downtown and covers part of the eastern side of downtown goes all the way to I-65. And we have a rapidly growing population out there, and the road network just does not support the kind of the response times that is really our standard. And so we know that we need to grow HPD, and we need to change the time-space factors with how the precincts do their jobs. We're fortunate based on geography that North Precinct, its geographic area is fairly dense. South Precinct is very, very spread out, and West Precinct is even more so. And when we look at the type of growth downtown and the kind of events like this last weekend, not just, of course, the protesters got on the news, but there were a whole bunch of other events that placed very, very specialized requirements on HPD to handle a dense urban kind of environment like we have here in the downtown area, not just the part that we call downtown, but even the neighborhoods that immediately surround it, that urban core. And so we've been talking now for several years about working our way towards a 4th precinct that probably doesn't look like the other 3. It probably has some of those specialized capabilities, like a lot of stuff that's in SOD may actually be embedded inside that precinct. That's a conversation that Chief and I are having, and as he looks at what's the right way to man that precinct, it may be that a central precinct needs to have some very specialized capability that focuses in the urban core, but is also available to go support the other precincts outside of the urban core. So there's a number of questions like that need to get answered that will get to a more precise answer to your question on the personnel. But given the challenges of rapidly filling police officer slots, it's extremely difficult. There's no way that we could in 1 year just suddenly add all the people it takes to man up a 4th precinct. And that's why 2 years ago you added 4 slots. Last year you added 7. This year we're asking you to add 10. There's no doubt in my mind that when we come back in FY19, we'll add some number. Can't tell you exactly what that'll be, but just our ability to recruit, train, and actually get the manpower into the field, we need to build that precinct progressively. One of these 10 slots will be the captain. That someday is that precinct commander. He'll initially take over SOD, but ultimately that likely becomes the captain you need for that 4th precinct. So Chief is making those kind of decisions and progressively building the force so that when it's the right time to pull the trigger on actually establishing the 4th precinct. We're ready. He has the manpower he needs, and he's had the opportunity to actually recruit them and train them and get the leadership in place. So not an easy thing to do. There's no way we could do it in 1 year, not only because the budget wouldn't be able to sustain it, but also just the ability to go out and recruit the people would be almost impossible. It also then ties to facility decisions, and we are working progressively through some of their facility challenges. Getting the CID established and getting that building up and running is a critical part of that, create space in some of the other precinct buildings to accommodate some of that growth, and then also progressively growing the fleet. And I'll show you the fleet number here in the capital plan in a minute, but Chief's right. Assuming approval of this plan, of this budget, we will order 40 police cars in October. So we've got to continue to catch up on fleet, not only for police, but for other departments as well, and I'll touch on that here in a minute.
I guess I want my colleagues to hear this, and we philosophically have talked about this a number of times because it keeps getting said we have a low crime rate, so forth and so on. I absolutely agree. But the majority of our call to services can be found in about 3 or 4 pockets, certain zip codes, so forth and so on. Now, I agree with the perspective on increasing fleet. I actually agree with the perspective on increasing officers. But my assessment and my worry is not that we just want to have the ability to drive out the 565 if we get 1 call every 2 weeks. I also want to ask if we can find a way to use those officers specific to certain locations and neighborhoods and housing developments that are causing a majority of our issues. And I guess to you, if we're earmarking certain amount of money to cars, is what you're saying, and a certain amount of money to police officers, why do I feel like there's like a discretionary talk now on the rest of the stuff? That's what I'm not understanding.
I honestly do not understand your question.
If you are saying that it's taking a certain amount of money to buy a certain amount of cars, and you're saying it's taking a certain amount of money to have a certain amount of police officers, are you in a way using the rest of the money to answer the other issues of decreasing crime in certain neighborhoods?
So every single line in the budget, whether it's general fund or one of the capital plans, every one of those needs a certain amount of money. Gotcha. So what we have brought you is a balanced budget that is, in our judgment, the best way to balance those funds. I believe this kind of the special capabilities you're talking about, whether it's police officers dedicated to a particular neighborhood or housing area, or if it's police officers dedicated to a particular commercial district, or whether it's a bike patrol, whatever it may be. And those are all kind of things that you and I have talked about, whether it's technologies like cameras and those kind of things. All of those are embedded in this plan. So if we need more officers in order to have somebody actually walking a beat in a neighborhood, I've got to have those officers to do it. Gotcha. And if we don't get these extra 10 officers, I guarantee you we'll be not any closer to being able to do that as routinely as we would like to. And so in terms of the techniques and things that you and I have talked about, I don't think we disagree a bit. We've got to grow our way into that. And that's exactly when we talk about, what does that central precinct look like? And what I'm describing to you is still ongoing conversations. The concept is still being developed, but some of those specialized capabilities are some of the very things that you're getting at. But no, this is not a go get police officers instead of technology. It's getting police officers and technology. Gotcha. Is what this budget drives towards. And as we learn what those technologies are, if there's not enough money in this budget, then we will roll up our sleeves and go find the solution to that. And we may come back to you and ask you to amend this budget, and we can do that anytime during the year. In fact, almost every council meeting, you are voting on some sort of budget amendments. Generally, they're very small little tweaks here and there, but if we need to bring you something bigger, then we will. And but there's still things to be determined to do that. But the kind of things that you're talking about, we still need more manpower. Understood. And they still have to have vehicles to drive. And these are 40 vehicles to replace ones that are already out there in the fleet. In some cases, they have well over 200,000 miles. In some cases, they probably have more than 300,000 miles. And allowing the fleet to age to that extent can put our officers and our citizens at risk. And so this is just normal replacement of aging equipment that is necessary.
And I don't want to come off as if I'm telling you, or Chief, I don't want you to take this. You guys are the professionals. You've been doing this longer than probably I've been alive. But I do want to say it is coming off, and maybe it's just me, understanding the importance that it's been probably the majority of this year for my community, that I just want to make sure we're giving just as much attention to, I guess, decreasing the amount of crime as we are into the increase of infrastructure, manpower, growth of the department, X, Y, and Z. And I know that is tough to make tangible in a budget. I just want to give sort of my perspective on the importance of gravity. If we, whatever budget we pass, inside of that, we are also assessing those things in certain communities.
Yeah, and some of the solutions to that is technology. Cameras cause people to behave differently, right?
Right.
And they tend to behave better when they know they're being looked at through a camera. But some of it also is just the presence of the police. We talk about the special emphasis we do during the Christmas shopping season. There's obviously a lot of money flowing around. There's people that are out there in vulnerable places, and just having a police officer in the parking lot makes a difference. Well, we can't do that if we don't have enough police officers. And that's something Chief looks at very, very closely in the way he assigns to the precincts, the way the geographic area the precincts are responsible for it's not random. It is based on calls for service. It's based on the analysis where they look exactly where those calls for service are coming from, what's the nature of those calls, what's the density of those calls, and then the geographic area the precinct is responsible for, and the number of officers they have is shaped specifically to meet the demands of those particular areas. We still want to do more of it, but the kind of analysis you're talking about is what goes on. And I tell you, when we're out in town halls all over the place, particularly out west, we routinely hear we don't see officers enough. We want to have your presence here, and so we know that makes a difference. And we know it makes a difference in the places that are more prone to crime than others.
And again, I am seconding the Terry Heights Initiative and the University Drive Initiative are examples of you guys did a great job using technology, manpower, and perspective. I just want to urge that increase. Thank you.
Yeah, I have one more question for Chief, please. Chief McMurray. Chief, is morale good in your department?
I think so, sir. Thank you for asking. That's to me.
Yeah, I
that's
forgot to
one
ask it
thing.
earlier. It was part of those standard questions.
What a great question.
Why do you think so?
Absolutely, because now they have your support. I mean, like Councilman Keith was talking, what have we done for the officers to allow them to do their job better? Well, you're providing them a field-based reporting system so they don't have to go turn in their paperwork. You keep it in the street. We're going to do that this year. They now have more modern weapons than they ever had. They have modern cars. When visitors and tourists come to Huntsville, they see you have state-of-the-art police department. We're proud of that. We now have a CID center that's run by one captain. Every crime in the city now has funneled and focused through one criminal investigation division. That's the way it should be. And we're having results. Like I said, our solvability is going through the roof on this. When the CompStat unit goes live, you're going to see progress like you've never seen before.
Can you tell us what a CompStat unit is?
CompStat is an active live crime database. So every time an officer fills a crime report out for burglary, he hits send on his GTAC. And it goes to records. And records look at it, and they said, everything looks good here. And they hit send, and it goes straight to CID. It goes right to CompStat. Every captain will see crime basically as it's occurring in the city. And we can do what you've allowed us to do with these extra officers. I don't know if you remember, but we've been trying to put together a street response unit for many years. Just last year, we added a sergeant and 4 officers to that anti-crime team, we call it. And they are doing great work. They take between 4 and 10 guns a week off the street because they're out here working those neighborhoods that you talked about, Councilman. Now, they're supposed to be a 6-man unit. I don't have 6 to put in them. But guess what? In October, we're releasing 23 officers out of the field training officer program, and I'm going to give them a whole fleet of shiny new Crown Vics that are 14 years old and have 200,000 miles on them. And those rookies are going to drive those Crown Vics, and they're going to be glad to have them because you know they're going to wreck them, right? So I'm going to give them the old cars. The new cars go to the senior. I just wrote up a brand new policy where senior officers get the new fleet, and we roll them down by seniority, and that's going to save us all a lot of money. Those are changes that are coming. Now, they're not going to like it away, but they're going to earn those new cars, and they're going to earn them. And they're going to do so by good driving habits and good behavior, low discipline records. That's how I make them earn those cars. And that's how we're putting them on the street very responsibly. So the street crimes unit needs 2 more officers. In October, when I release those 23 officers, I'm going to put 2 officers in that street crimes unit, TDY. 2 really good officers who need the chance to get in that unit. TDY, we're going to rotate it through every few months, keep the officers refreshed. These are the kind of programs that are going on right now because you've allowed the manpower. And by the way, There's another 30 cops in training right now. They're hitting the street in March, and in March, we're going to hire 35 more officers. We're taking applications for those officers this month in September. So this is the first time in history HPD has had 3 sessions in progress at the exact same time. It's all because you've given us the availability to staff up and hire them. So next year, we're hoping to plateau out, get as close to 100% as we can. We'll be very close next year.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief McMurray. Any other questions for department heads?
I have a question for Chief McFarland.
Chief McFarland, would you please come up?
Chief McFarland, are you getting enough money to keep the public safe?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, we are.
And how is morale in your department?
I think morale is good. That's most of what I hear from our folks is they're happy with equipment we're getting. You know, we're getting 7 new trucks that's coming in. We're getting a lot of other equipment. The thing I keep getting from our folks, and I'm really proud of this, is they're looking for ways to do more. They want to provide better service, give us the tools to work with, provide better service. They're putting long hours in training that equipment, and seem very happy doing that.
Could you describe the 7 trucks you're getting?
Yes, they're made by a company called Pierce. They're top-of-the-line trucks. They're what we call fire engine or pumpers. And basically they're just typical fire trucks, except they're state-of-the-art. And they're state-of-the-art for ability to function as far as what we need to do to protect the city, state-of-the-art as far as safety, all the things on them. You won't find a lot of bells and whistles. It's not needed, but you'll find a lot of function. We have a truck committee that I think is outstanding. It's made up of people from our department, people from the city shop, the mechanics there, that put the expertise in it from the user, from the mechanic. I think we have one of the best truck committees anywhere that looks at all the features of these trucks when we're buying them to make sure we get something really functional that will hold up and last us a long time.
If the expected tall buildings are built in downtown Huntsville, I mean, I think that people are looking forward to the next 5-10 years. Are you going to be prepared for that if we have more tall buildings?
We will. We will be prepared for it. One of the biggest things that's going to help us prepare for it is heading toward our new training facility that we mentioned earlier. We've got to have that. If you had to ask me a priority of what I've got to have, we've got to have that training facility, because when you start working, firefighting is tough enough and technical enough on the first floor. When you start having to move manpower and equipment up multiple floors, can we do it? Yes. But we can't do it without the proper training. That's my only concern. And so we need to really keep moving forward as fast as we can, getting our training facility in place to make sure that our biggest challenge will be making sure we have people trained. And also it'll take manpower. I reflect some things that Chief McMurray said. You know, as this city grows, we've got to grow with it to cover our areas that maybe not getting as close a coverage. It'll also take, when we start doing taller buildings, it's going to take more manpower to fight a fire in those taller buildings. We will have to look at our manpower distribution, but we will be ready for it.
Okay. And so I guess you've answered the question. Did you got your training facility in this budget?
We're starting.
Yeah, okay. So it's taken care of. You don't need the extra money for that. So that's your priority, and it's covered in this budget?
All of it's not covered, I don't think. I think we're getting started covered. It's going to take quite a bit to build it. It's going to take quite a bit to build it. I know Mr. Hamilton's working on it along with the mayor to make sure we've got the stuff. We're making a good start toward it. But that's a priority. We have got to have that training facility to train our firefighters for the safety of them and for the safety of public.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hamilton, following up on that, could you walk us through the timeline and budget
Nice,
for
Chief.
that new training facility?
Can I ask Chief before you,
It's going along
Oh,
with
okay. I'm sorry.
question
Go
for the
ahead.
chief. It's just following up on Mr. Russell's question.
Yeah, so we've got funding in the capital plan for the training facility, and it's a what we're calling the public safety training facility, because they'll have both police and fire. And yeah, it's a classroom building and some physical fitness thing, as well as a significant amount of outdoor capability, equipment, and things for the fire department. That's the outdoor training that they need is our biggest shortfall right now, and so that's, you know, classrooms are classrooms, and we got good temporary solutions for that, but ultimately we need to get the full campus built out and get the towers and things that they need. So we've got money in there right now. It is currently under design. What we have, we think, is gets us probably about 2/3 of the full requirement, but we won't know that until we get it fully designed and get it bid, and then we can prioritize those things that are more critical than others. So there's probably several months worth of work to be done to lock in exactly how much will get done in that first phase. My expectation is that next year we're coming back to fund the second phase of that. But what we, the chiefs are going through exactly what the requirements are. We'll prioritize the ones that are most critical and get those into phase one. So the design is for the full in-state campus, and then we'll cut back to what we can fit in the budget for this year. So, and you'll see the numbers here in just a minute.
Two
Mr.
quick
Keith.
questions for Chief. One is just, do you feel like you have enough manpower, or do you think there's going to be a point in which you would like to increase, or do you feel like you're at a sustainable now amount of manpower?
We won't be able to meet the needs of this growing city sustaining the same manpower. We will have to have more manpower. But typically when we do, we look at, I'm going to say a group. Instead of, it doesn't really help me to add 2 officers. What I need is to look and say, okay, here's where we need a station. And if you take, say, a fire truck, you've typically got 4 people on it times 3 shifts. It takes 12 people if you add another fire truck. And that's not counting adding in a few extra to cover vacations and stuff. That's a very minimum. So we will need to be looking at those type of blocks of where we add a fire truck here, a fire truck here. There's some other areas where we'll eventually have to add a ladder company, which when we start buying these, we're talking about a $500,000 truck, a few $1 million for a station, and then the manpower to figure out that as we go is how it will work into the budget.
Okay, and this is not a hot seat question. I understand it's going to be tough, but I'm just being completely upfront. A number of my childhood friends, people I grew up with, are firefighters, Pulaski and on University. Do you have a perspective of what you could present to the council that would say you're either comfortable with, or you have a perspective that says there needs to be an increase for our firefighters? Do you have a data perspective that says that the parallel in pay does not work, or does work, that could be given to the council, that gives your office and the administrator's perspective on why the two are either paid differently or should not be paid differently or should be paid the same?
I don't have it prepared for you now. I mean, it's definitely something we could look at. And see, I think
Absolutely.
we looked at it a while back, but we can really visit that at any time.
Maybe it's just for me. If you could just send it to me.
And Councilman, this really gets down to, I mean, it's kind of unfair to put the chief on the line
I don't-
to do that with talking about his men and his thing. It's more of an conversation that we need to have, and we can show you the facts and figures as we went through it, 2 years ago, I think.
Probably less than 2 years.
Yeah, less than 2 years ago, and we'll be glad to share that information.
Thank you so
with
much.
And I've got a couple other things. Mr. Kling pointed out that, we need to, if somebody wants to put in $700,000 for a COLA and then $600,000 for bus service, we could all take it out of carryover and rollover. Let me point out real quick, there is not a pot of money sitting there, rollover money, that can just be taken and used as necessary. We always have to have a budget where revenues equal expenditures, and we want to come out every year with the revenues coming in just a little bit over expenditures. Carryover money is money that is left over at the end of the year that goes usually towards some project, and Ms. Sargent will bring to you in probably October or November timeframe the carryover. Most of it is construction money that's sitting there for Zert Road that we didn't get finished with in this fiscal year, but it's carryover money that will be put into that account that will carry over to the next year. Please do have no misconceptions that we have a pot of money called carryover that you can just go to and you can pull from and use it for anything you want to. When we start talking about our employees and what they make and 1% versus 2% COLAs and everything, we have a very good pay scale here. We have very rich benefits, and rich benefits mean that people get that their benefits are very, very good. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody leaving the city because of pay, and that is really that's really the truth. We have a great benefit system where we pay about $127. Our employees pay about $127 a paycheck for family coverage, while on the outside private sector employees pay $730 per paycheck for family coverage. We can go down the list, and when you look at the average wages that we make plus the longevity pay, we are very, very much in the same place as the rest of the community. We have got to be very careful with our taxpayers' dollars, because that's the only place that COLA comes from. It comes from taxpayers' dollars. And so, a 1% COLA is probably is something that that works for both the employees and for the taxpayers and for the city. When you go beyond that, you may be taking us beyond where we need to be, and also beyond where we're competitive. We may be more than competitive with the outside world, and that's what we try to do. Try to make sure that we have a competitive wage, a competitive benefit package that makes us a competitive group for our employees. So, that is something to consider as you start looking at rollovers. Bus service, Mr. Kling wanted to put $600,000 in for Saturday bus service. Guys, it sounds great, but let Mr. Brown work the numbers for you, and then, we can get some of it back as federal money, but eventually that federal money goes away. Everybody has looked at what the federal government is doing. At some point, they're going to wean themselves off of this. The budget hawks are going to come in, and that's why we work and try to run our system, our bus system, as economically as we can. Because if we can do it economically, then we can keep on doing it. Once the federal money goes away, we'll be able to keep a bus system in place. But if we get it too expensive where we can't, when federal money goes away, it may go away. So let's try to have a long range focus on it. Mr. Culver asked about the Arts Council. We did talk to the director of the Arts Council about adding $50,000 to the $100,000 pot that they have. Every year, starting about 3 years ago, we give them $100,000. That $100,000 they give out in grants to different groups of the members of the Arts Council, and it's a great program. Allison Dillenjocken came to us this year and asked us to up it by $50,000, where we would love to up it by $100,000. We did not think that was the priority that we were looking at with the small amount of money that we had to increase this year. So we did not do that. We have added some money to her budget to start helping with, and we will do some other things with her as we get closer to Grissom, but to getting the Grissom facility ready to go and them moving into the Grissom facility. But let's wait till we see what the actual needs are as we go into that. That's the Sandra Moon facility. And then just the general $50,000 that they need for general operating. We haven't added general operating to anybody. We've had requests from several agencies across the board, most of our agencies, but we have not added general operating to any of them. Let me just say this. If you decide to add something, make sure that we take off, because we know how much money that we have projected to come in, and we feel very confident with those numbers. The numbers that we will have in expenses, we want to make sure that equals the amount of money that is coming in revenue. So, all right, to the capital plan. I'm sorry it takes so long.
Thank you, Mayor Battle. Mr. Hamilton.
So the 1990 capital improvement plan, your annual recurring revenue for this year about 31.6 million. There's a planned debt issuance that would be scheduled to occur late next spring after we've completed the audit and CAFR. So total revenue 105 million. Expenditures 98 million in capital projects, a little over 12 million in debt service, and then 2 million in transfers. Let me explain what the transfers are and why it's critical what the mayor just said about if you want to add in one area, we got to look at where we cut somewhere else. The reason we've brought you a balanced general fund budget is because we pulled over $2 million out of the capital plan in order to balance the general fund budget. Now, that's something that actually started a number of years ago as a result of the recession, and we are actually making great progress in bringing that number down. Had you looked at what we predicted the transfer would have been several years ago, it was a good bit more than 2 million. So the reality is, the growth in the city, the way in which we're managing the budget, we are having a lot of success in bringing that subsidy down, so that we can focus the capital dollars exactly where they're supposed to be focused, and that's on actual capital expenditures. So total expenditures out of the 90 CIP, 112 million. The major categories, and this is just if you look at the capital plan, have broken up the various accounts into major functional areas. These are just the labels that we've provided for those. In parks and recreational facilities, 37 million. Municipal facilities, so those are facilities that we use in order to do our missions. There's some facilities, when you look in there's some things like the Sandra Moon Complex that you could probably put either under municipal or Parks and Rec, but just in terms of the way we have them broken out, when you look at that 28 million, infrastructure projects and maintenance, so the 90 capital plan is generally where most of your infrastructure maintenance occurs. Not completely. The 2014 plan has some as well, and in fact this year, in order to do what we wanted to with repaving, we actually moved repaving into the 2014 plan and moved some road construction into the 90 plan as a one-year switch. So 20.4 million in infrastructure projects, 5.4 million in fleet and other equipment programs, 5 million in community projects. Let me tell you, community projects are things like some of our portion of the Burritt Museum expansion, the Botanical Gardens expansion, some stuff with early works, those kinds of projects is what we've defined as community projects, as well as our partnerships with the library. And then you got 1.3 million in economic development. As you know, intent is that the predominance of your economic development dollars are in the 2014 plan. The 1.3 million you see there is the residual of the Merchant Square development. So we've got a couple more years of payments on that particular development in the 90 plan, and then economic development, I think for the most part, will come out of the 90 plan and be exclusively in the 2014 plan here in the next couple of years. So on a percentage basis, that's how those categories break out.
Questions for Mr. Hamilton, Mr. Russell?
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton.
Could I-
Under community projects, obviously we'll be selling the bicentennial in 2019. Is Early Works preparing for that, and does this budget help them prepare?
It does. Can I make a recommendation that after I answer this question, let me finish my presentation, because I'll probably hit on a number of things you have questions about, and then I'll, so specifically to the bicentennial.
I thought you were finished, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was not.
He's just getting rolling.
So yes, the Early Works is preparing for that. They've got a number of maintenance projects that are ongoing right now.
I was hoping you were finished, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I can be
No,
done.
I'm
whenever you
teasing.
tell me
Go
to
ahead.
And so yes, we do. What you're seeing there is the commitment the city made. There's also other sources of funding that's going into that. So the funding you see from the city is not the exclusive funding for the bicentennial preparation, but it's a big chunk of it.
Okay, I apologize. Go ahead. I thought you were finished.
So I want to just highlight for you some of the major projects that are in those monies. So the numbers you see on that particular chart don't add up to 98 million. I'm just trying to hit some highlights for you. A number of things that have been out there for a while that we've been talking about trying to get funded are finally coming together. So you see John Hunt Park getting funding, Bronze Springs Park, the Merrimack Park expansion is almost completed design now, Iceplex renovation and some other things. On the that's the, as you face it, the left-hand side, those are all mostly recreational center or parks kind of projects. And then on the right are other categories of things. So you see the 12 million in road construction. Those are new roads. That is not maintenance. About 3.5 million in sidewalks and streetscape improvements. 2.5 million in drainage. The abbreviation you see, that's the Municipal Justice Public Safety Complex. That money is to do several things. One, we need to reconfigure the way the fire headquarters is. We need to provide some more office space for prosecutors and some of the the headquarters capabilities for the police department, as well as what we talked about just last week about creating the third courtroom. So that funding allows us to reconfigure a number of interior spaces in that building in order to accommodate the growth in the municipal court, as well as police and fire. And then you see the public safety training facility at $7 million in this year's budget. And again, that is currently under design. I've had my first review of the overall site plan for that. I would expect probably early in the calendar year we will have completed the design and be ready to begin bidding that and getting good estimates on it. So there are a number of capabilities that we want police and fire to have, but aren't necessarily absolutely critical to get done in the first phase. And so we will, if the budget forces to, we'll push those less important components to a second phase and make sure that we hit the most important things in the first phase. A big part of what we need to do, one, is make sure that our training facility actually has all the capabilities that it needs. We have not had that here in Huntsville in quite some time, but also we need to stay on timeline to vacate the Johnson campus because what we'll see here in the next year or two then is hopefully some successful commercial development at Johnson, right? And you'll see an RFP come out no later than 1 December on redevelopment of the Johnson campus. So we need to make way for that. You also see some renovations of the animal services facility, and then the fleet purchase of $5 million. So $5 million is the most that we've been able to put into fleet in quite some time. Last year we did $3.5 million. And so we have been able each year to progressively increase that investment in order to get at replacement of vehicles. The first batch of things that we'll order in October, one is we've been talking about the police cars, but also sanitation vehicles, which have been a significant issue for us this last year, and a few other things for public works and landscape management things in order to get at some of their mission requirements. So a number of things that will get addressed right up front. Let me tell you, one of the things that we've done in order to try to improve our decision-making, our opportunity to invest in our fleet is kind of partially turn that almost into an enterprise kind of fund in a way, in terms of the way we're managing it. So this last year, you budgeted $3.5 million for fleet in FY17. The reality is we'll end up spending well over $4 million on fleet, because anytime we have an insurance settlement, that money goes directly back to fleet capital, is used to help replace vehicles. That was not happening just a couple years ago. We're also making better decisions on repair versus replace. So oftentimes a vehicle comes in, it's so old and has so many miles it's worth almost nothing on the market, but we'll put $10,000 into a new drivetrain. Well, we'd much better off put that $10,000 towards replacing that vehicle and leverage the fleet dollars that you put in the capital plan. So doing those kinds of things, and then when we replace a vehicle, that vehicle goes to auction. The proceeds of that auction goes back into fleet capital. And this year, we're changing the way we're managing the maintenance fund so that we can be even more precise in making those repair versus replace decisions. So the reality is we're having a lot of success in leveraging the capital dollars to really grow those in a way. So we're doing more fleet replacement and really accelerating that process. So our employees are more effective in the field. They're also safer in the field when they have that newer equipment. And so we need to continue to keep our eye on that. And I think that is my last slide.
Questions for Mr. Hamilton?
Yes.
Mr. Culver?
Thank you, Madam President. So, as it relates to the University Drive widening project, was that in the 90 CIP?
No, that would be, I'm not sure exactly, where that is in terms of timeline to execute it, but the funding for that would be in the 2014 plan.
Okay,
and
so I'll
Shane will be
just
able to
wait
talk
until
to
you
that.
get to that then. Thank you, sir.
Other questions for Mr. Hamilton? Mr. Keith?
Hey, John. A number of them, but I guess, we've talked in depth on a couple of them. I just want to get some clarification. So Sandra Moon, as I think your last couple of slides shows, 10 million. Just give a brief overview of what that looks like in this investment comparative to you're trying to develop 1, 2, 3, 4 properties in District 1. And while those, the renovation for Johnson is 2 million comparative to the, I think it was 5 million for the other ones. Can you just give a brief overview of how you're doing a number of different things at a number of different properties in North Huntsville?
So, in terms of our approach to the Sandra Moon complex versus Johnson, because of the dynamics of we brought
Right.
those properties together, and I think there's always going to be people wanting to try and compare, and the reality is those will be two completely different projects. Where the Sandra Moon complex is intended to be wholly a public facility and remain so, the Johnson campus is intended to go into redevelopment. We think it's residential, by a private developer. It may have a commercial component to it, but we expect it to be a private development, except for the recreation facility that's there, which is a small part of that overall campus. And so the money the city ends up investing in Johnson is going to be completely out of different accounts. It's going to be those things more focused on economic development and on infrastructure development. And so it's always going to be an apples to oranges comparison, and we just have to be aware of that. So the other thing that's happening as well is when we look at the different parts of the city and what are their quality of life needs, what are the recreational needs, how are we currently meeting those, there's clear differences. So both north and south need new library branches. the directly to the library construction itself, the city is committed $2 million to each one of those. The library branch for North Huntsville is actually funded last year, so you don't see the money because it's already sitting in the bank. The $2 million that's in there this year is for the one in the south. But also, the library north is going to go on the Baraka campus, and so you saw $5 million to begin the development, and I think that gets you really through probably the first phase of redevelopment of the Baraka campus. So where our assessment was the best place to do a library in the south was on the Sandra Moon complex, and so you see some money for that. In the north, we think it's actually on Baraka, not on Johnson. So if you're trying to find where's the library money for Johnson, well, you're never going to find that. It's over on Sparkman at the Baraka campus. So when you look at those kind of comparisons, you kind of have to aggregate, as you said, multiple facilities in the north to compare it to one or two facilities in the south. Quite frankly, we don't go into the budget saying, north versus south, east versus west. It's really looking at, where are we in the development process in every component of the city, and what are those needs, and what's the best way to invest in it. So, we'll continue to make those decisions. The $2 million that you saw there for Johnson, that is not intended to be in any way investment and development of the whole campus. That is specifically to do the renovations and expansion that we've talked about for the recreation facility specifically. I put another block of money in FY19 for Johnson as well that is intended to be a start for that redevelopment. Part of the challenge with that is until we pick that private partner and until we see the kind of development they want to do, we can't then fully decide exactly what part's going to be the city versus the private developer. So we'll have to approach that like we do every one of our public-private partnerships on any kind of private development and determine where's the right place to invest city money. My expectation is what we'll see is investment over a number of years, not just as a single batch.
Now, let me say thank you for. You have been wonderful in sort of explaining this, and I feel really comfortable explaining this myself when we finally do pass this. And I think we're in a really good spot as I look overall. Two questions on two things that you said, and then one I'm really uncertain about. If is $2 million, you believe, enough to make a really unique, good facility? Or do you see yourself saying $2 million now, maybe some later beyond maintenance? Do you think $2 million gets you to a point, considering that building is in pretty good condition, to make a really unique facility?
I do. Now, obviously, and where we are in the design process, we could come up with ideas that could end up being expensive ideas. I don't think that we will. I think when we look at the needs of the community there and the kind of the concepts that we have, I don't really expect it to be that expensive to make those alterations. We're really mostly talking about interior work, reconfiguring courts, moving interior walls, things like that. There's clearly going to be plumbing and mechanical, electrical things that tend to get expensive. But I do think that $2 million makes a dramatic change in that facility. As we get into it, if the smart thing to do is add a second phase and come back with more improvements later, then we'll do that. We in all of our facilities, we're trying very, very hard, and I think General Services and the Projects Office does a very good job of this, of not value engineering away the purpose for the renovation. I've seen that happen. You allocate a certain amount of money for us to get a certain capability out of a building. It's not enough money, and so we value engineer that away. That's not the way we need to approach things. We need to go find the money to do it right the first time, do good quality development, and if it's better to delay it in order to get the money lined up the right way, then that's the kind of choice we need to make. Sometimes it's a hard decision, but I think it's the right decision to really invest the taxpayers' dollars the right way. But I don't expect that to be a problem here. I really think that's a pretty new facility. It was built back in the 90s. Right. It's in great shape. I think it's been well maintained. The school building, I can't say that about the school building. Yeah. That gymnasium was well designed and it was well built, and we're proud to have it. And we think it's going to be a very good rec center. But as you know, we want to try and put some unique things in it, so it's going to be a little bit different than normal.
I'm really excited about what you guys come up with. Just two more. So the sidewalks and streetscaping. Who determines that? Who do you usually get together with and determine? Is it already because you can't pick a number without knowing what places you want to go probably or whatnot, as you just sort of look at last year and forecast it's going to be about the same?
All right, so let me kind of break those apart. I mean, obviously, just for space on the slide, I rolled them together, but really The streetscape is a separate decision-making process from the sidewalks and the other things.
Oh, okay.
The streetscape we're referring to is the treatment that we're doing downtown when development occurs on certain blocks. And so typically, really, it's Shane Davis and Kathy Martin, his team, as they're looking at the development and the growth downtown, where's the next block that's the right place to do it. If we know just like with the avenues, had we gone and done streetscape 2 years ago and then they built that apartment complex, they would have torn up everything that we did. We really need to design those in concert with the developer on a particular block. So typically what you'll see is the streetscape investments prioritized based on where we see the developments occurring and to time it and really partner with those private developers to make sure we do it the right way and make that investment then. And we don't necessarily have a particular block with a precise number. What we're trying to do each year is put money into that account so that when the opportunity presents itself, Shane and Kathy have the budget they need to then go execute and take advantage of that opportunity. So it's not real precise as we go from year to year. In terms of the sidewalk, there's multiple different accounts there. There's sidewalk construction, which is held for the most part in engineering. So Kathy Martin and her team execute building sidewalks. Most of their priorities come out of the planning department. So as the planning department is assessing the sidewalk network and they see particular places where we need a segment to connect to neighborhoods or whatever it may be, they work with engineering to prioritize those projects and execute those. There's also sidewalk construction and sidewalk maintenance that occurs in public works. So as we go through it, there's some that, hey, it's best to contract that out and engineering take care of it. There's other parts that can be handled just fine internally, and Public Works will do that. So the funding that Public Works has is predominantly to buy the material so their workforce can do it. There's another component that's just last year was the first time that it was in the budget, and you'll see it in the budget every single year in the capital plan. You see ADA and in parentheses PROAG, okay? What that is, that's specific money to be coupled with the repaving program. We have a requirement to ensure anytime we repave a street, ensure all the concrete on either side of that street meets ADA standards. And so Public Works uses that along with the repaving program to make sure that they're going in and targeting those, the driveway aprons, the sidewalk widths, the angles, the slopes, all those kind of things, all of the handicap ramps at the corners, things like that are pretty expensive. And what we found is if we tried to just throw that inside of the repaving, we wouldn't get much repaving done. So we've actually been able to set aside a separate budget line to couple with that. So that's the $1.5 million that you see in the ADA accessibility for Public Works.
Gotcha. So I guess $5 million really isn't a lot, I mean, in the grand scheme of it.
It's not.
Last question, I don't know if this is for you or Shane. Council High. It has been thrown out a number of times how we'll pay for it, where the money's coming from, where we got the $1 million. We are at the new rendering process that we just finished with Michelle and I think it's Foresight. I can't remember. How do we account for their money and whose budget is it out of?
Well, you don't see it appear in the budget right now. It is in the contractor development agreement for the city center development. When they close on that property, then we'll receive those funds. And council, back when we made that agreement, committed those funds would be dedicated to the council high redevelopment. So you don't see a line in the budget simply because we haven't received the money. We could have shown it as a potential revenue and then an expense, but when that comes in, we will go into a council high account and be ready for that development.
Now, is that $1 million, I guess, our money to allocate for the development of the property, or are we, I guess, also going to give some sense of, I don't want to say in-kind work, but are we paying somebody to do the construction, or do you feel like that $1 million is for us to use for construction?
So that decision will be made once we have a design and we fully scoped it out. Some of the stuff that's happened there, the demolition has already been done with in-kind work. Public Works did that demolition, and the city funded the asbestos abatement that was required in order to do that. I would fully expect there to be more of that. So if there's any more demolition, Public Works absolutely can handle that, and that would be really probably our most efficient way to do that, and some of that money would be used just to pay the tipping fees. But I think you would count the labor and things like that as just in-kind contribution from the city. at this point, until we have a design, until we can really get some estimates on it, it's hard to say how far that $1 million gets us into the development. My guess is it doesn't get us everything that we want there, so we'll need to work that. It's certainly a project where we would look for the community to contribute towards that, and we would love to see the Alumni Association and others contribute and partner with us in redevelopment of that site. So, but until we get it fully scoped and fully designed, we can't tell you exactly what the cost will be.
Is there a timeline? This is my last question. Considering the bicentennial went to the meeting, they said that they wanted that site to be on a trail of some sort or wherever it is. Is there a potential timeline when that $1 million would be foreseeably in somebody's account?
I don't know precisely when it is. It's due March next year. It should be March of next year.
Good. Thank you.
I have a quick question for you. There was $8.5 million in there for John Hunt Park. I don't know if I missed it in your presentation when I was making notes, but is that for the golf, the running, biking, golf training facility?
That's a portion of it. So, there's still some money in the John Hunt Park account from last year. When you add this in, the things that I expect to get done in this next year, one is the sand volleyball complex, the golf practice facility, the cross-country course, the biking facility. We need to address improvements at the kids' space, and so I hope to get that done this year. There's still a good bit of infrastructure work to be done, so if you go down there now, you'll see the street network rapidly taking form, but there's a lot of electrical infrastructure and plumbing infrastructure still required. There's a good bit of fencing and things that need to be done. So it's a long list. What we have chosen to do on most of those things, there's a few things in John Hunt that we break out as a standalone project. So if you go back to prior year budget, you'll see the tennis center broke out separately. You can see the Iceplex broken out separately. But for the majority of things in John Hunt, we're putting it into that account, and then as those projects are ready to be executed, we just execute out of that one account. So I'm happy to sit down with you and go through all the different little components of the master plan. There's a lot of moving pieces to it, but I would expect in this next year to make a big leap forward in terms of delivering programming. Our priority the last couple of years has just been getting the infrastructure in place and getting designs done and kind of setting the conditions for that development to come. And so while the team has been really busy at John Hunt, the public can't necessarily see it because it's a lot of behind-the-scenes kind of work, again, setting the conditions for all that development. But this year, I expect you to really start seeing some big leaps forward in that.
I know there's a great deal of interest expressed in these council chambers about having some of those projects move forward.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, this weekend is our first cross-country meet on the golf course. So we told them we'd allow them to use it this fall as is. Now, as is we're not out there moving around trees and things like that. They just defined what they wanted their course to be, and we mowed it really close for them, and we'll use a little bit of paint so they can define the course. But there's at least 3 regional cross-country meets that I'm aware of that will occur on the golf course this fall.
Terrific. Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Hamilton regarding the 1990 plan? Thank you. Mr. Davis.
Council members, the last portion of the 2018 budget's the 2014 capital plan. The carried forward balance, current balance in the 2014 capital plan, as you're well aware, in 2014 we passed a 1-cent sales tax increase, 100% earmarked for this capital plan. The carry forward balance was $8.2 million. The recurring revenue projection is $41 million. And then a planned debt issuance is $15. So total revenue available for the 2018 portion of the 2014 cap plan is just over $64 million, with planned expenditures of just under $64 million. So you may recall the 2014 cap plan when we passed that resolution. The predominant expenditures for that was for roadway improvements. I can tell you that 65% is a cash roadway improvements, and the 11% in orange is actually in 2014 when we passed the 1-cent sales tax. We also passed the Restore Roads agreement with ALDOT. So Randy Taylor, time was finance director. He and I sat down and to cover those first year and a half of our commit with ALDOT, we borrowed $36 million while we let this fund start to build. So that 11% debt service that you see there is actually the Restore Road. So when you couple that with the 65% cash, we're spending 3/4 of this fund in road construction. And then we sprinkle in what the other parts of trying to grow both the 90 capital plan, the general fund, and this 14 plan with the growth. The economic development's about 10%. And then 7% redevelopment efforts. As you are well aware, in the last 3 to 4 years, we've really focused on getting back into existing commercial corridors that our public has said, you know, are what we call gray fields along University Drive and Memorial Parkway. We still continue to invest there, a small percentage of that. And then the multimodal transit services. Those are the things that quality of life things we talk about. And that's for downtown, it's parking. For other parts of our cities, it's bike lanes and greenways. And then 1% is a drainage plus up to supplement the 1990 capital plan. That pretty much dominates the 2014 plan as a whole. For this year, we have a budget record since I've been with the city. Total road funding just in the 14 plan is $39.7 million. You couple that with the 1990 plan, we're close to $52 million in road construction just for 2018 by itself, which is very impressive for any community in the nation. Just for it to be, you know, that's not federal or state funding, that's 100% local funded projects. This will be our last payment for the $25 million annual payment for Restore Our Roads. And then we will start to look at in the outer years of the 2014 capital plan, as I'll get to in a moment, as far as what we will do in the future. I think it will be very much a blend of taking some of our own roads that we want to widen or to improve capacity within those. And then I think we must look at trying to go back to ALDOT with some other type of 50-50 program. And one of the items that is on this list, two items down, let me get to the next item, which is additional funding for Weatherly Road. That's connecting Hobbs Road to Memorial Parkway in the Grissom area. We've plus $2.5 million to fully fund that project as anticipated. Probably the biggest unmet need we have in transportation in this community is the one true interchange that we have in our community, and that's I-565 Memorial Parkway. It is at functional failure. I think any person in our community that tries to traverse through there in the afternoon, in the mornings, there's a lot of weaving, there's a lot of stacking. That interchange was built to handle about 60,000 cars a day, and it sees about 125,000 cars a day. That's the newest item in the 2014 cap plan. That project to fully fund will be somewhere in the $120, $130 million range. So we've started putting some money in the outer years of the 2014 plan in hopes of helping fund that project, either through a national program through the current administration, whether that be a Tiger Grant or a Fast Lane Act, or something that might come along with the state, is to be ready to have a strong match for that project, because that is our missing link as we move forward as a community. It takes you north, south, east, and west of anywhere. It is in the core of the city, and if you want to go anywhere in and out of Huntsville, you must go through that interchange for the most part. We added an additional 20% match funds of $1 million. That's for a lot of upcoming MPO projects that have 20% match that we have upcoming. Some of those key ones are Martin and Zert Road, and we have some others. So just forecasting where those are at in the design and right-of-way acquisition, northern bypass, and some of those, we did a small plus up to those. And depending on how fast that those accelerate to construction, we may have to plus that up even more, but we feel like we have the capacity within the overall city budget to do that. As Mr. Hamilton mentioned, and Mayor Battle, street resurfacing, we're at supplementing an additional $12 million. How we're breaking that down, residential streets is $8 million, and then our collector, minor and major collectors, typically get you in and out of residential areas, and in our commercial corridors from a residential district is $4 million of that $12 million. Other budget highlights, multimodal transit services, $15 million. That's for $1.5 million for greenways, and then the other portions of that is for 2 downtown parking garages that we're currently working on through the downtown master plan update that was presented to you. We're still, we actually met today, Mr. Hamilton, myself, and Tommy Brown, on still trying to find out where the locations of those that would best serve multi-block locations within walkable areas, and it's very challenging. It's a good problem to have due to the growth of downtown. It's kind of challenging to try to figure out where we can put those, either where it's a public-private partnership on private property or city-owned property. And we'll continue that conversation as we get towards the end of the year and first part of the year and be ready to come to you with a plan to expend those funds. Economic development efforts, we have a plus up of $1 million in that fund. It typically has had $4 million. That's due to the number of industrial projects we're working with our local chamber. As the mayor has mentioned in prior council meetings, we're working 52 projects at the chamber right now. I have 28 within my department that's just in City Hall. So total, we have 80 economic development projects working in this city. Some of those will move forward, some of those will not. As you know, if we bring you a project that's within the administration, it has to have a return on investment, and we craft those diligently and vet those. And then the same goes with our chamber projects. Ditto landing improvements, we still are committed $250,000 a year into Ditto's master plan. That will be coupled with last year's funds, and some of that work is starting to begin. And then redevelopment efforts, $5 million. That is for some pending projects that we believe will occur along Memorial Parkway and still along the University Drive corridor. We've got some really good things that, of those 28 projects that I mentioned, along those corridors that are, some of them are 2 years old, some of them are 3 years old, that we feel that just where we know that they're at are going to happen, and we'll be bringing those as we have before you would return on investments and go into those in very much detail. Should those not occur, that will just roll forward, in our redevelopment efforts for the FY19. As if you look in the capital plan, there's a annual effort for that. Research Park improvements, we continue to press forward on the master plan of Research Park and redoing that, making it more walkable, and what we've heard from our tenants and our owners out there, and supplementing our land sales out there. That's a very aggressive master plan that will take many millions of dollars to compete nationally, and we're committed to that. So $500,000 will go into that to continue those efforts. And then downtown redevelopment, $500,000 there, and that kind of helps with our streetscape, supplementing that and utilities and whatever we may need for projects that are ongoing or proposed for our downtown area. Answer any questions you will have.
Questions for Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Culver.
Yes, and Mr. Davis, it's not uncommon to sometimes move projects back in our CIP plan, or in some cases forward, depending on the need. But I'm looking for the project, the widening of University Drive from Providence, Maine to County Line Road.
Yes, so that is part of Restore Our Roads. It will be a part of the $25 million contribution we'll make to ALDOT when you approve this budget. It's currently under contract under a separate resolution, so we will make that payment. Okay. We are obligated to make that payment. And 72 West, as we call it, University Drive, is one of the last 5 projects. That project and the widening of Research Park Boulevard from Redstone Arsenal to just north of University Drive is the last 2 projects that Restore Roads will fund. Okay. The project itself is about 50% design. Okay. That 50% is not a milestone. Most time in a federal aid project, milestones are 30%, 60%, 90%, then you go to construction. Okay. I think early next year we'll have probably a public involvement meeting out there where they can take a 6% set of plans and have area businesses and ingress and egress, and people make comments on those. We're probably another year to 14, 15 months out before we start construction. I would think construction realistically on 72 West will be somewhere in 2019.
Okay. Okay. Very
but
good.
The project is progressing forward.
Great. Yes, and I'm aware of that, and you guys are doing a great job. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam President.
Other questions?
Yes.
Mr. Russell.
Mr. Davis, thank you. Research Park, 500,000 sounds very light to me. We've talked about the Research Park has a feeling that it's, I don't know how to say it, but it just doesn't feel as nice as it used to.
Correct.
And it doesn't seem like 500,000 is enough, and especially if you're going to consider, which I'm very much against, buying a bunch of those old crummy properties out there.
Sure.
So how are you going to do it with just 500K? How are you going to make an impact?
It's a very good question.
Thank you, Mark.
I've been working on this for years, but I do have a disagreement over if 500K is going to buying some of those crummy properties. I'm voting no, and I'm hoping 2 council members will vote with me.
No, absolutely. When we speak of Research Park improvements, our improvements are all public improvements. So there's streets out in Research Park that need resurfacing. We did a large resurfacing 2 years ago. There's sidewalks and landscaping where trees have really just gotten outdated from the root beds that landscape has been very cordial to cut some of those out, so it's putting those back in. And as you've noticed, we've got an annual plantings that we've put back into the park at key intersections. We're paying, so the $500,000 is to supplement an ongoing fund that we've had since the inception. So every land sale that we have goes into a research park fund. Last Thursday night, you approved a $3 million land sale.
Yes.
So that goes into that fund balance. This is only to help accelerate that fund. So this is to plus up the current balance, which has a decent balance with the Dynex land sale, and the current balance was about $5 million in there. And this $500,000 will help offset that. So what we've been doing with the capital plan is take that $500,000 and use it for design services to design certain things that is part of that master plan, so that the research park fund itself, that 100% cash, goes on the ground into the park.
Okay, so yeah, it's enough to make an impact, is what you're saying?
Oh,
'Cause
absolutely.
I think we're
Yes.
getting behind in my mind.
Yeah, so what you'll see rolled out for 2018, we're currently working on brand new signage for the entire park.
Great.
The large pylon signs like you see on Old Madison Pike and University Drive and 255. We're currently working on with the Chamber Air and Co-Shoots on some schematic designs of what those will look like. I think they'll be very impressive. Working on a banner program, painting all the lights, doing some sidewalks, and connecting the greenways. Lake 4 and Lake 2 and 3 have some, about 70% of it's in. Just with a little nudge, we can connect it all. And I think that'll be the low-hanging fruit you'll see in 2018. And as we continue to creep forward, you'll see others move forward. But I think 2018, you'll see a big splash in Research Park.
Okay, and so talk a little about priorities. It's not my priority to fix 72, and I really don't care that people from Athens get to Huntsville faster. That's my opinion, and certainly the way my constituents ask me, they want me to represent them. But we're not doing anything for Governor's Airport Road, some of the ones that affect my constituents greatly. Why are we doing that, and when will we start getting back to building roads in the downtown, in the Easter area, to help those people get to work?
So I think what we have to let the public keep in mind, we are working on those projects. What you have to realize is this is a 10-year rolling plan. So if you looked at the cap plan 2 years ago, they were sections like Carl T. Jones that's part of, Cecil Ashburn that's part of the Restore Roads. Governor's Drive just rolled off. We added it last year to extend.
But it needs to be rolling every year.
Yeah, but those take time. You know, they take time to design, they take time to buy right away, but those type projects are funded. Now, from an economic development standpoint that you charge me to do, I do care that people from Athens can get into our community and get out. When you look at how we compete on a national scale for some of the projects we're working on, we do not have a labor shed in Huntsville by ourselves to go compete for those. So if you're going to be a large metro city, like our peer cities that we all like to travel to and say, hey, we need to be more like city X or city Y or city Z, they have a regional labor shed, workforce shed. Well, that means you've got to have a transportation network. The beauty of it is if we can land that company here, the taxes that get paid and produced from that company, we get to keep here. A certain percentage, small percentage of that workforce may come in and, yeah, they get an income here and they take it back to their home community, but the bulk of that return on investment happens right here in our city limits. And then we're able to take that and expound and talk about adding stuff for the police department, the general fund, and doing more greenways and road widening. So I think I know we're working on a map for the night you passed council, this proposed budget. I know I've charged Kathy Martin, she couldn't be here tonight, with an ongoing map of road projects that are going on. I marked it up last week. There's not a spot in this city that doesn't have something in green, orange, or red. We have blanketed this city with proposed road work, and it's in different stages. You'll see, as I mentioned, Carl T. Jones should start summer of next year. It will be very, very painful at times. They will wish probably.
Cecil Ashburn?
I'm sorry, Cecil Ashburn. Okay. And you may get your constituents in Hampton Cove say, why are we doing this project? It's so painful, but it's just like Eastern Bypass. I routinely say we do projects that people don't understand, but once we put them on the ground and the community starts using them, if we took it away from them, they'd come pick at City Hall, and that's one of those projects.
Okay, and so the repaving, $8 million for residential, it's the most I can ever, it's obviously the most we've ever done. And will people feel that, $8 million and $4 million collectors? I have this feeling that people don't think we're repaving enough, that they believe Ms. Reed says it every council meeting, they don't feel the roads are paved. With $12 million, will people feel that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think where it gets missed is I think we do a really good job repaving residential streets, better than any city that I know of. And we talked to a lot of our peers. I think some of the complaints you get is once we leave our neighborhood, we all drive on the collector streets. You know, the airport roads, the Bob Wallace's, the Carl T. Jones, the Zert roads, and so on and so forth, and Weatherly roads and Bailey Coves and Sparkman Drives and Blue Springs Road, because we've left our neighborhood. And it's some of those that are very expensive to pave, and we focus so hard on residential streets. Having, you know, a third of that to go to collector streets, that's where the community's going to feel a difference, because, you know, when you drive in and out of your residence or neighborhood or subdivision, and we resurfaced it 3 years ago, you don't think about it till you get on that main highway and you've come across a lot of potholes that Public Works have diligently tried to patch the best they can, and you think, we're not doing anything to roads, you know. But then when you get back in your neighborhood, you forget about it. So those collector streets that Mr. Hamilton and Mr. McNeese plan to resurface, I think that's where our public will feel the difference and see it. Because once they get out of the residencies where they're shopping, they're going to work, or they're taking their kids to school, or they're going to church, they're on those a lot more than they are their residential street. And that's where you get the complaints a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam
If
President.
I could chime in on that.
Mr.
Madam
Carr.
President. So, and Mark, you were doing fine until just now, but anyway. And the same could be said about Governor's Drive in terms of helping folk who commute to New Hope and Gunnersville and places like that. But we're not going to have that discussion. But I do want to say that, and I wish that we could maybe do a joint town hall meeting on the very western end of the city. While people who live in Limestone County, even the portions that are not within the city limits of Huntsville, and folk who live in Athens and beyond, Florence perhaps, are beneficiaries, but they're not the intended beneficiaries. We have a large number of residents, and Mr. Hamilton, I know that you are well aware of that when you attend those town hall meetings, and going west and east, trying to go east in the morning from the western part of the city is a nightmare, whether it's University Drive, whether it's I-565, whether it's Capshaw Road, whether it's Douglas Road, and likewise going west in the evening. I mean, it is truly a gridlock. I mean, I live there in Providence, and if I don't leave, well, I don't come downtown much. I meet my residents out in the district more so now, but leaving from downtown, if I don't time it right, I get into that rush, that traffic rush, and you have 30, 40,000 vehicles actually coming out of Gate 9. You've got another 30,000 residents coming out, well, all not residents, but people coming out of Research Park, and doesn't matter which way you go, you're going to run into that gridlock. And so I think that investment is a very wise investment, because those individuals who live in Rock Creek, who live in Heritage Estates, who lives in old Cobblestone, and all of those neighborhoods, they pay taxes to the city of Huntsville. And they too should be entitled to the same benefits, the conveniences that we experience more so in the central city. So you're doing a great job with that, and we'll keep it up.
And Councilman Culver, if I could add to that, all cities experience that. Something very unique that we looked in urban development last year for the budget. I found a 3-ring binder that had what the city, before we had a capital plan in 1990, part of the general fund would have a back page line item that just had road projects, you know, and Sparkman Drive was on there. And I've turned a few pages, you know, years later, and Pulaski Pike was on there, and Bailey Cove was on there, Taylor Road was on there. And you start looking at it, and you start taking those cap plans, and you know, Dennis Madsen has done a great job. If you look at the city growth, I'm sure all of you have seen it, where it starts in 1950 and then it goes a decade in 60. It shows how the city growed. If you start looking at that, it's exactly what the leaders before you got here did.
Yes.
You know, they put the infrastructure where they had the growth explosion so it would continue to bear fruit, that you would have housing values remain strong in Hampton Cove and South Huntsville and North Huntsville, and we're doing that out west. It was our growth corridor. We made that stake in the ground in 1999 and looked up and got 10,000 acres. Now, are we putting a large percentage of our money there? We're well balanced. I don't think you see any part of the city that we're just totally focused on and we've turned our backs on any other part of the city. From my perspective and the map that I will show you to the public Thursday night, we're well balanced, and we'll continue to that. There's certain years that is maybe a little stronger than others, but if you look at the rolling capital plan as a whole, we're very well balanced, and we have to. That's why you see, if you take the economic development and the redevelopment, almost 20% of this capital fund is going back in existing neighborhoods, in existing corridors. We have to reinvest in those corridors to keep them healthy, but we also got to make sure that we put infrastructure in our new corridors that would generate new taxes. It's a hard balance. I think the administration does a good job of trying to balance that act.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Mr.
And
Heath.
I think in the first year I've learned anything, Shane, is that all these calls to come look at my road, one pothole doesn't mean that you have a bad road. So I imagine we cannot make anybody happy, really. I want to say this to the administration while you're here, Shane. You're an all-star, man. We all know what this is, what you've done for this community. Many people will never know how important you are to the city, and it's nothing but respect. But I will urge you, and Lord willing, we have a mayor that becomes a governor to, and this is I just want to say publicly, consider in a way getting another Shane for us, having some sense of support with you. And I'm saying that just respectfully, because you are an amazing person. It helps the community have as many of you as we can. I want to ask these questions specific to the development. And you actually brought up a point, and I want to flip it. You guys are involved, and I read it right, downtown redevelopment, city center, mid-city, Ditto's Landing, Research Park, to name a few. And I know that we've discussed this a number of times personally, but in a lot of ways, and again, this is objectively and as pragmatic as I can say it, it looks like you're south of University or you're west of 72. And the identification for opportunities of land acquisition, economic development for Northwest Huntsville has to be specific to the market. I am not here to any way ask you to stretch and create something out of thin air. Places like, and I want to make sure that I'm saying this right, we own Ace Hardware, up the Parkway we've purchased, and this is where I split directly with Councilman Russell, those locations that we bought, the market in themselves said that there was no use, and that potentially those are places that we do need to demolish and see if there's a new use for, because of the change in the market in that area. So there are other opportunities I'm asking, and I know it's contingent upon a number of variables, but if I just did a map and had this conversation with a number of people, those constituents that are in my community, how do we say to them that this is not a direct correlation between us choosing places but following the market? And how do we then give them hope, tangible hope, that there are locations in Northwest Huntsville that we are looking to? And then that goes to my second point, which is you are heavily involved in a lot of our RFP processes. How do you see yourself getting involved with the one at Johnson? And what does that look like in support? I guess, as we know, a lot of that is contingent upon what that market wants to look like in that area. How do you see yourself, and maybe you can answer this down the road, getting involved with that as maybe being a catalyst for a number of things?
Sure. First of all, thank you for the kind comments, but I have to say we've got a really healthy team.
Yeah.
It takes a village. It's not Shane Davis. It's a group and a team that's very humble, has no ego. All we want to do is win for our community. We don't care about getting credit. So, but as far as when you look at the capital plan and you see those specific type projects that occurred, we're working several projects like that in North Huntsville, and we feel in 2018 we will bring you some development agreements that look like that. And what happens then is if it has a multi-year commitment, which there's a couple of those that more than likely we'll have a 4 or 5 year type commitment. Actually, they must go in a capital plan so we don't forget about those. You pass that resolution, you pass that development agreement where we're going to give X to gain Y. And we're protected with a callback and return on investment and so on and so forth. We will put that specific project in the capital plan and push it out. And that's what you see in some of those. There's a couple of those I've talked to you in private about that we can't speak publicly, just to let you know where we stand with those. We feel very, very confident on about 3 of those in North Huntsville. It's the word that I use often in many town halls with you guys, no matter where your constituent may lie, but it's the hardest word to understand. It's patience. We push this city every day from one end to the other. Dr. Robinson has the same in certain areas. There's some great opportunity sites in South Huntsville, and we politely ask District 3 to be patient for some other things to finish and come to fruition. We have some major people looking at some major pieces of property along North Parkway. We've got to get the parkway under construction. We like 3 right-of-way acquisitions being complete, and then once a retailer or a developer who wants to do a project sees that project in motion, well, now there's a sense of reality when it will finish. But right now when I say, hey, we're planning to start in X, which would finish it in Y, they're continuing to kind of do some of their due diligence, whether it's a retailer or a developer. But then they called me back and said, hey, what's your track? But once we're under construction and we have a finite contract with a contractor to finish by December 19, or whatever that date may be, now they can start planning. They can go to a bank and start talking about financing and when they would close and working a development agreement with us. The good things are happening. I think good things are happening in the community. The biggest thing is our crime rate's really low. We have job growth. We have population growth. When you have all those good things, rooftops and retail follows that. When you have stagnant growth and population growth or job growth, most communities see multiple location of retailers closing or just laying off workers to kind of balance the load of what the revenue cash intake. One of the things that I can tell you is the Lowe's in North Huntsville is having a record year. Mm-hmm. It is outpacing any other Lowe's in Madison County by a mile. Those are top stats that I give to other retailers that people start digging in and they start driving communities themselves and their neighborhoods themselves to figure out what's going on, and it builds confidence. And we'll continue to do that, not just for North Huntsville, but South Huntsville and Hampton Cove. Mark routinely gets, I need some retail in Hampton Cove. And trust me, I push that every day. But we battle 2 things there. There's a floodway that parallels Highway 431, so there's not a lot of depth in Hampton Cove that I have to challenge with. And then there's still development occurring in Jones Valley that can serve 3 markets. Jones Valley actually serves Hampton Cove, kind of the downtown proper area, if you will, and South Huntsville. So a retailer can put a store in that location and serve 3 zip codes. I can't fix that till there's no more development occurring. It's almost finished, but we keep those challenges. I know all these council members in front of me with districts all want that. Their community wants a quality of life that they represent, and we'll continue doing that. Some years we're more successful in other areas, but we treat the city the same.
I guess, and again, my second question was, do you feel that you could get involved in helping the development of Johnson?
Thank you.
But I do also want to ask, I guess the point is you put up there a slide that had allocations for a certain amount of money, and then you talked about what would be needed. And do you feel that you have, and I don't like using the word discretionary, but we'll say discretionary, that if something comes up in 2018, you have enough money or leeway in order to get that development that might be for North Huntsville done?
Absolutely. And you asked for Johnson, the mayor will have everyone in his administration heavily involved to make sure that we put an RFP out, one that's competitive, one that provides something the neighborhoods want. Right. And we'll be very aggressive in finding a partner for that. We always have been in this city, but there's one thing that we've not been bashful of is that's being very aggressive. We're very aggressive about collecting sales tax. It's one of the things I've stood for this council. I hate about our state law is how we collect taxes. Sales tax is king. I don't care what city you are. If you're Huntsville, Alabama, Dothan, or where I was at Friday night of 220 people, Union Springs, Alabama, for a football game. Yeah. Sales tax is king. So you have to be very, very aggressive or you lose out, and that's something that we do. One thing that we keep in mind both in the 1990 capital plan that John showed you in 2014, it's not like the operating account where we keep this really close, razor-thin zero balance because there's so many needs and wants in the operating plan. So it's very, very hard just the general fund to balance it. It has to be balanced. We keep a small running balance, ending balance, if you will, in both those capital plans. One is to make sure that we've got a lot of projects in there, and those costs that are in there, they're only estimates. So a project come in a little heavy than what we participated or projected, and we can cover that. But also a special project were to come in the door that's very valuable and has a great return on investment in the community, we can come back and do a budget amendment that you see routinely throughout the year and add that to that. So yes, the answer to your question is yes.
Thank you. And my final statement is I'm very realistic. I absolutely understand in a lot of ways things that we've discussed privately as well as with the constraints of the administration. But we all, you're right, come from 5 different districts with a lot of different perspectives. And all of you are privileged to the perspectives of us all, so you know what it means to have something successful on that Johnson campus. I'm only saying more so like a plea that you have hit some home runs for this community. I just named a few of them, you and the administration, that you guys see Johnson or any other property in 2018 in Northwest Huntsville just as important as you see a mid-city development.
Without a doubt.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Davis? Mr. Kling, welcome back. Any questions?
Can you talk any about Airport Road traffic? Or are there any plans for widening it or traffic flow signalization or anything that could be done?
You know, Airport Road comes up about every 2 years in a capital plan, and at one point in time we, before Richard Kramer passed and was Director of Traffic Engineering, he and I spent a year with Skipper Engineering and a local engineering firm, and actually took some Google Earth Street views and actually started a 2-scale model of what it would take to 7-lane Airport Road. The results were very startling of what it would do to that corridor. Airport Road is probably more than likely going to be one of those roads that twice a day in our community that's going to take a little time to get through. And every great, thriving community has 6 or 10 of those. Thank goodness we don't have a ton of them that we're not working on. Airport Road, can it be widened? Absolutely it can. It cost about $30 million to go from the Parkway to Whitesburg Drive, is what we currently estimated it about 5 years ago. Due to the TVA transmission, Huntsville utility transmission lines, it can only be widened to the south. So when you start to add 2 additional lanes to that 5-lane road and put back sidewalks, you're looking at taking about 40 feet from the existing curb into the shopping centers, the church. It would almost look like another tornado came through there. And we quickly backed away from that. We had that conversation. There were some alternatives to offload some traffic on Airport Road that the community did not want, and that was taking 4 Mile Post and rerouting it. Unfortunately, it did go through some existing neighborhoods, and it took it in further south of Whitesburg Drive and lined it up with Martin Road to take some of that Redstone Arsenal traffic that's coming over the mountain and shooting it straight to Martin Road. That came back in from the neighborhoods wildly opposed to that, so much so we took it off the Transportation Master Plan as one of the 112 projects regionally. That's the only solution, is to offload some of that traffic in a different direction. We've stayed away from that because of the healthy neighborhoods that are along 4 Mile Post and the objection to that.
Okay. I'm sure I missed it, but what's the breakdown on the resurfacing? Isn't it like 8 million neighborhood, 4 million arterial? Or
yes, sir. It's 8 million residential streets, 4 million minor major collectors within local streets, no state or federal highways. It's all local streets controlled by the city of Huntsville.
I think obviously that's going to be great citywide. And I guess one other thing was fire station number 3. Is there any sprucing up that can be done to that?
Mr. Hamilton can answer those questions.
So maintenance of the existing facility, we don't really do those as a separate line item unless there's a major renovation plan, and there's not for that facility. Station 3 really needs to be rebuilt. There's some challenges with it that, sprucing up, we can do a little bit of that out of maintenance accounts, but what's in the capital plan and in my briefing, what I focused on was the FY18 projects. But if you look at the whole 10-year plan, there's actually 4 new fire stations that are programmed in the 10-year plan. That's not necessarily new locations. It's rebuilding of some of the existing ones. There's some where Chief has gone through, has done some analysis that need to be repositioned slightly to better serve their districts and things, and so he's doing that analysis. But in the 10-year plan, there's a plan to rebuild either whole new stations, new districts, or replace existing of four fire stations. That's ultimately what Station 3 needs. We can do a little bit of sprucing up, and that'll make it a little bit nicer. But the reality is, it needs to be rebuilt.
Okay. The adjacent neighborhoods, as you know, that's kind of in a landlocked area almost, and the adjacent neighborhoods are really been very vocal about. I think it's the location, not the building, that they're concerned about. But is it possible another fire station, if it had to be built, could be elsewhere in that shopping center complex?
When we get a little bit closer, we'll figure out what's precisely the best place to do it because, there's a number of stations that have repositioned, so that changes some of the lines. And so that's where, they have a good formal process that looks at what are all the calls for service, what's the density, what's the response times, those sorts of things, and figure out what's really the best location for it. I think that what you would see is it moves slightly to the west, and when I say slightly, you're probably talking no more than a quarter mile or half a mile, but that's still analysis that needs to be done. And
We could
it'll
certainly get
affect others.
neighborhood input or, communication with them when we get to that point.
Yeah.
Is there a general timetable, or are you talking like next year, 3 years, 5
So
years?
the current model, we have 2 stations in 2020, 1 in 2022, and 1 in 2024. And so in terms of what's the highest priority, that's to be determined. That's the analysis the chief will work on.
Any other questions? Any other presentations from the administration? That it? Many thanks to everybody who was involved in the work that was done on this budget. It's not only a very prudent, careful use of taxpayer dollar, but I think there is, it was done with a real eye toward quality of life. And that's what this community is known for, and that's what will bring people here, it will bring industries here, and it's going to help improve our quality of life on many levels. And thank you all for the work that you did. Thank you, council members, for your thoughtful questions. Is there any other business for this evening? We are adjourned. Thank you.